Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, Capital One Bank, Eastern Consolidated, M&T Bank, Sterling National Bank, Meridian Capital Group, Customers Bank, Aerial Property Advisors, Dime Community Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance. Additional funding has been provided by AKA Hotels Corman Communities, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, AVR Realty Company, Avison Young, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Chase Mortgage Lending, JP Morgan Chase, Citizens Bank, Cohen Equities, Colliers International NYC, Collins Building Services, Connect One Bank, CPEX Real Estate Services, Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handler Real Estate Organization, Handro Properties, Hodges Ward Elliott, Inc., Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, Kilroy Architectural Windows, Madison Realty Capital, Matone Group, Mercantile Bank, New Banks, Newmark Knight Frank, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Pulcinelli, Rockefeller Group, Rosewood Realty Services, SJP Properties, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Knackle Group at Cushman & Wakefield, the Merinkoff Family Foundation, the Moynihan Group, and these friends.
There's a limited amount of affordable housing. People need to be able to live affordably in New York. Seniors, homeless, people need this. So today, with the help of my executive producer, Laura Bailey, okay, we've assembled this group of affordable housing experts to provide my audience some information during our 17th season of the Stoller Report of what's happening in affordable housing. Needless to say, as I mentioned, I have Laura Bailey, who is with Capital One Bank.
Hey,
I have
Michael.
Adam Weinstein, who is the president and CEO of Phipps Housing. I have Alexis Sewell, okay, who is the president of Settlement Housing Fund. And last but not least, we have Brenda Rosen, who's the president of Breaking Ground. I think you're the elder statesman over here. since you're the elder statesman.
Is that a compliment? I'm not sure.
No, that's not a compliment, but I'll give it to you. And you've been probably the elder statesman in a different manner because the company's been in the affordable housing business more than anyone else.
Right.
How are we taking care of the affordable housing crisis, which I do believe is a crisis in the country and in our market?
I would say mixed. In this market, the city's administration has been a real leader for a generation now amongst municipalities and states in promoting affordable housing, and with good reason. Otherwise, New York turns into Aspen, Colorado. We don't have a workforce that can fill jobs, drive cabs, teach kids in school, do the things that our city needs to thrive. On the national level, I think the picture is a little bit more mixed.
How does a bank get involved with affordable housing? Because Capital One's been involved in a variety of ways. You're a lender, you're an equity player, you're a tax credit participant. What's the major roles and how do you get involved? And why do you work with, I can understand, with Lex and Brenda, with everyone. Why do you deal with them and maybe once in a while with him?
Yeah, well, when you think about it, it's everything that it's our responsibility to do. If you're good at real estate, if you understand finance, building affordable housing is what you have to do. It's your responsibility to the community that you live in, and it's what your skill set brings to the table.
But I was saying before, and my biggest pet peeve, and I was telling Brenda that I was doing a report on 1010 Wins, and this elderly woman calls me up. She says, I'm trying to get into this project at Essex Crossing. It's a senior housing program. I don't have a computer. I applied, I sent a letter to the post office box on May 16th. It's June 5th. Could you send me an application? I said, all I did was try to report to you about something about that. So that person can't find the affordable housing. Then, besides the fact, if you don't have a computer or if you don't have that, there's this problem with income bands. And the income bands are that you have to be either very poor or to certain levels you have to follow or qualify.
I think we're all pretty well versed in this. We all do these types of rent ups, and I think that the goal is to build this housing and be able to reach folks that are on the lower end of the income scale. But having said that, there is a problem, because in order to meet the eligibility criteria, there are set income bands, and unfortunately, if you don't meet them precisely, then you can lose your opportunity for housing. And I'd say that the city we continue to try to refine the process to make it easier for people to apply, to make the process smoother. But it's still cumbersome and challenging, and that's why organizations like Breaking Ground and others are there to try to help facilitate people moving forward with the process, like the woman that you spoke to on the phone.
You were saying?
I was just going to say, I think the administration is very conscious of this, the problem that you highlighted, and has made real strides to address the customer-facing aspect of intake, trying to raise awareness of affordable housing lotteries that Settlement Housing Fund and Breaking Ground run, as well as Phipps Houses does a little bit of that work too. They've also, I think, tried to diversify income levels so that bands are less discontinuous.
A good example of diversification of the income spectrum is the development that you did, Alexa.
Yes, we're working on one up in the Bronx now that's only 60 units, but we have 5 income bands in it, which is a market nightmare.
Why? Okay. But I like that idea.
God bless.
So people in different categories have the opportunities.
Right. I mean, it's a lot harder to structure the financing for a development like that. I mean, the reality is that the major source of affordable housing finance in New York and throughout the country is the low-income housing tax credit. And the low-income housing tax credit builds housing for people at 60% of the area median income, which is around, for a family of 4, it's about $50,000. Probably the second source for people in New York to allow their housing to be affordable is a tenant-based subsidy called Section 8, which can be used in private market financing, but it's in affordable housing too, because it allows rents that are even though they're affordable to people at 60% AMI, they're not affordable to people who are in shelters. So let's try to give this to the to the, not an inside baseball. Let's talk about a person, how they could get an apartment, maybe in this Bronx project or in certain other projects, because I think one of the things that I like to do is to educate the consumer, because I think people are educated to the point now that 87,000 people apply for 150 units, and believe with the City Housing Connect, it's very important that you can have this website where you can see the opportunities. But let's explain the process. It's a family of 4, okay? And the traditional is 60% of area median income, but then there's even the lower levels, like up to 40% of the area median income.
Correct.
And then there's apartments for certain people who qualify in the senior level. One member of the household has to be, 55 and older or something like that? Let's take a new project that you're working on, both of you, and try to identify that person and how the person would go through the process.
So when you start a process like this, you have to advertise the number of units and the income bands. And somebody that is logged on to Housing Connect is going to get a notification that there's a lottery that's upcoming for X project in X borough. And that, as long as you're logged in and registered on Housing Connect now, you can fairly easily enter yourself into that lottery. Now,
One application,
one application.
right, and that's always, it says over there.
Yes.
But then isn't there something with regard to the higher number of people if you live in the area? Is a preference?
A community preference.
Community preference, and then normally there's also another preference if the person may have been in the police or
Vision or hearing
Right.
impaired.
hearing.
Municipal employees. Right.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
So they get the application, they apply over there. What's the procedure when you get the application?
So the lottery system for affordable housing is a highly regulated system because, as you mentioned, there's a lot more demand than there is supply. So the lottery gets advertised, and by the way, in addition to just being on Housing Connect, we try to get out and inform people in the neighborhood, especially, hey guys, there's this new development coming online. We'll go to churches, we'll go to different community groups, leave flyers to really try to get more people aware of the fact that there's this development going up. The lottery will be advertised for a couple of months. In that time, people will put in their applications. They'll include some income information, that sort of thing, or start gathering their documents together. At the end of the lottery, a log is generated. And the lower your number, you're the first person that we try to interview. So we go in order of that log number, and when we work with people to see if they're in fact income qualified. If they're not, they get removed from the process. If they are, they have the opportunity to move into that unit eventually.
Okay. So let's talk about developments. In addition to there are specialty developments for homeless. Then there are specialty. I think the Settlement House was involved with the actors. In one,
we weren't way back.
Way back there was
before my time.
Right, there was a
were you guys involved? You guys?
Yeah,
you
we
were
did
involved with
we
the
did a project in Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn,
where we had a
right on
set aside.
Schermerhorn Street.
Yes, on
over there.
Schermerhorn.
Right. So let's talk about those unique projects, and also, especially since I'm a baby boomer, let's talk about the seniors, okay? Because that's in my opinion, one of the biggest problems and the difficulties over there.
I think Breaking Ground probably does more work with formerly homeless households than any developer in New York City. But the city has undertaken to set aside at least 10% of the units in every new development to deal with the homeless crisis in New York City and in our country. You can't become unhomeless if you don't have a home.
Don't you also do training in certain of these developments? Training of job training?
Yes, and I think, Michael, that's a good point, that the people on the deepest need, part of the spectrum, also come with a need for resident services. So the organizations like the folks that are here are good at providing more than just a roof over people's heads. Often there's some caseworker. Many people require nothing other than the roof over their heads, but some people who need some attachment to something else that's going to help them get a leg up in life, that's provided in the development itself.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, so as Adam was saying, we focus primarily on chronically street homeless individuals, right? So the folks that are on the streets of Manhattan, Queens, and Brooklyn, we do outreach to them, and then we focus on moving those folks into our transitional housing and into our permanent housing. When you've been on the streets for months and years and decades, you're usually coming into housing with severe mental illness and probably a chemical addiction, medical frailties, kind of you name it. And so when people come into housing, those are the folks that we have robust services on site to help them stay stable. Because as Laura said, having an affordable rent is paramount to stability, but staying there and being able to succeed, whatever success means for you, is also dependent on us providing services to support your needs.
People are aware of the 80-20 program, which is not in buildings which are dedicated to be 100% affordable. Let's talk about that, because as we were talking before about Myrtle Avenue as an example, developers building a building, they want to get the tax abatements for the tax postponement over a period of time, so they enter into the 80-20 program, which has produced a substantial portion of the affordable housing, correct?
Well, you would have to get a different panel to talk about the 80-20 program than this panel. Because the reality is, while the 80-20 program and the 421A program are very great producers of affordable housing through cross-subsidy, the bulk of new supply in New York City, at least, is being provided through the city's affordable housing program.
Right, but it wasn't that way.
Housing that is subsidized with a capital subsidy in addition to a real estate tax abatement, and oftentimes with a density bonus.
But aren't you people, not all of you, involved also with handling the renting up of these affordable housing?
Yeah.
We do help with that.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that's especially important about the 80-20 program is a lot of those developments are going up in Manhattan and core Manhattan. These are, you know, as Adam said, they're very dependent, the financing in those buildings is very dependent on that 80% market being able to command very
Sure,
high
they're taking
rent.
care of the market rents. And
Right.
The affordable component is probably paying 20% of the market rent, okay?
I think the other thing that
I
is
mean-
really good about the 80-20 program is it expands the overall subsidy that's available to the New York market. The city's housing dollars can only go so far. They do a great job being as efficient as possible with them, but after you run out of federally allocated and locally available money, what else do you have? And 80-20 can bring in new money that's
But when
only accessible through that program.
Your affordable developers, nonprofits who are running this, how in today's world, with a limited amount of availability of land, how do you find spaces to build affordable housing?
I think that's one of the greatest challenges that we have right now. I mean, we're at, you know, we've built in the South Bronx and in Central Brooklyn, and right now, if we went back to buy the same property that we bought in 2006 to 2009, we couldn't go near it. I mean, we've been priced out of East New York several times. So you know, with construction prices going up and land prices going up, you know, we're looking for city-owned land and other ways, but we're also looking at property that isn't nearly as close to public transportation, because it makes it more affordable, but it makes it less convenient for our tenants who don't have cars, and it's a huge challenge. I think it's
One of the key tools that the city has available to it that entities, especially I would mention Phipps, has been really smart about is thinking about how to use zoning. So there are sites out there that are zoned for non-residential developments, or they're zoned for, you know, 4 stories. But you can go in and, working with the city, rezone it so you can actually develop residential or be able to do more density on the site. So that is a tool that the city has made good use of and is continuing to look at ways to.
Since you brought it up, let's talk about.
If I may, I would argue that community-based organizations, typically not-for-profits, though not exclusively, and affordable housing providers have a comparative advantage in doing rezonings. Lex's organization has been here for 50 years. Breaking Ground has been here for 20 years. They're not going anywhere. They're not selling the business, moving to Florida, you know, giving it to a
How long
child.
has Phipps been around?
110 years.
Good.
Or 112. And
You really look good for that age.
it's the makeup. But that's the reality is that's a political process, and organizations that are there for the long haul, that provide an important public service, really, we're essentially government outsources, have a comparative advantage in listening and in assuring communities that we'll do what we said we'll do.
So where are you developing today? Tell me about the developments that you're working on.
Our biggest portfolio of developments is in the Bronx, and we try to, in the South Bronx, and we try to develop around there. You know, we really try to work where we know the neighborhood, where we know the different community groups, or we know the residents and the community boards, and we feel like we have something unique that we can bring. I just wanted to add on the point that Adam was making about zoning, because a lot of people have heard about this big push around inclusionary zoning, and I just wanted to mention that the city recognized the fact that zoning is so crucial to being able to get additional units, and they're basically telegraphing now to the whole market, hey, if you want a zoning change, know that you're going to have to do affordable housing. So that's a way of sort of...
On-site or off-site? or both?
on site.
On site, because that's the site issue.
No, because you know, people were building the inclusionary housing off-site because it was in the community board, so it's changed. And where are you building today?
Well, if I told you that, I'd have to kill you.
It'll be the first time, okay.
Like Brenda and like Alexa, we have done a lot of development in the South Bronx and are continuing to look for property that we can afford to buy in the South Bronx.
What about Harlem? Is there any affordability left in East Harlem?
Very, very difficult to purchase.
Yeah, we've invested in several developments in Harlem, but not any within the last couple of years.
I mean, with two neighborhoods, you know, one which is always in the press is East New York, okay.
Cypress Hills, Southeast Queens as well.
Cypress Hills, Southeast Queens, maybe Coney Island. I'm not sure about if there's any more availability out there, and also the Rockaways.
I mean, the magic number is if you can put together land that eventually gets to under $40 a square foot, it's potentially, it's on the brink of being financeable as affordable housing.
But if you're getting the zoning bonuses,
Possible to
a big number.
you're not going to be able. What about the affordable housing on the New York City Housing Authority properties?
Oh,
which
the
I think
next
is
generation.
the next
Yeah.
generation, which I think is valuable because
do you
there's
think
no
about that?
need for the parking lots or certain of these things that were there. They could build, you know,
Right.
layered parking and so on.
Yeah, so we were just awarded a site in Mott Haven to use an underutilized parking lot to build senior housing, and so you know we'll be doing that over the next 2 years. But I do think that that's something that NYCHA has been trying now for quite some time for a lot of different reasons. But I think it's a great opportunity, and I mean I think a lot of development can come out of that, and you know, and it's all over the place. You know, I mean, it's located in so many different neighborhoods.
I mean, because you have all of these city housing that was built at a different time and different zoning, okay,
Right.
and
Sure.
so on. Now, what is Phipps doing these days? What's your major projects?
We have a 1,700 apartment complex in the Bronx that we're working on, a 1,200 unit complex in East New York, a 1,700 unit complex in Southeast Queens,
Those don't sound to me like small little developments.
and then a whole bunch of, I'd say, so the reality is developing it is easy. Owning it for the long term is the hard job.
Yes.
And so our approach is get scale in a community. First of all, it brings resources to communities that haven't seen them. And secondly, it allows us to manage more efficiently and thus enhance services that are provided on site.
So here's the question. I mean, Laura was saying that Capital One provides financing, they provide equity. How do all of you develop a new building, okay? Even if you buy the land at a low, reasonably price, how do you develop it? What's the mechanisms required to get a housing done?
Well, first you need an expert developer and community organizer.
So we have three other people with the exception of Adam.
You go find that party, and they maintain great relationships with the relevant parties at the city government. What you've really got to do, though, is understand, to Adam's point, what the back end's going to look like. All affordable housing has to be reverse engineered so that it works for the long haul. You need all the money necessary to make the development successful for 20 years.
I think
on the front
what
end.
you're saying, and I remember one of the first affordable housing units that I saw when I started the show a number of years ago, and I was with an attorney, and whose family happened to be involved with affordable housing, and he said, you know, I wonder what this project's going to look like in 15 years.
Yeah, that's the key thing.
And that comment to me still permeates in my system, because the way some of these developments, not done by people sitting here, that were constructed in the early 2000s, were developed by people who weren't affordable housing developers. It was an entree to get into the real estate business. And some of the
understandable. The reality is that we've evolved to a large extent, and I think the policymakers in the city, particularly, and great banks like Capital One and great developers like my colleagues here have improved over time. We've aged well, and in that we're looking toward what is the very long residual, meaning how do you ensure that this housing remains viable over the very, very long term, not just stanching the bleeding that was in the South Bronx in the 1970s and 80s, but really building a firm base of affordable housing in New York.
Okay, you need the capability to re-rent the apartment when somebody moves. You need to maintain these properties.
Correct.
Okay, because nothing was built, the windows have to be fixed, the roofs have to be fixed.
Absolutely.
There's deferred maintenance that has to go into the property. Okay, you have to pay off the loans that are required over there. And then there's the refinancings, with the capital credits and so on. What about the subject, which, you spoke about the vouchers, Section 8 vouchers. What about the term Mitchell-Lama? Is that being brought up these days?
Yes, I mean, there's a lot of Mitchell-Lama housing. Some was financed by the city, some by the state. New York City has a lot of both of those. And there's big refinancings that go on at Mitchell-Lama housing. But depending on how they were put together to begin with, a lot of those Mitchell-Lamas are also opting out of the affordability, regime that they were in. And so there's actually a loss of affordable housing from the Mitchell-Lama
Right, I mean,
portfolio,
there was a
which is
substantial amount in Roosevelt Island. They were old Mitchell over there, and many of them opted out of the program.
not unlike what you see, in the rent-regulated world, which is a little bit different because it's not like a tenancy choosing to do that, but the market is sort of, the rents are going up to the point where they're leaving the regulatory, the framework, the rent regulation framework. What's so special about affordable housing in New York City is that it's really very well financed and very much with an eye towards the future. I mean, when you think about how strong the housing market is right now, and that hasn't always been the case in New York, and certainly you have to plan for a time when the market softens significantly. I think a lot of people feel like affordable housing is in a lot of ways the safest of the investments available because while the rents are lower and it is harder to get the money for the maintenance and capital repairs, the rents are always going to be there. There's always going to be a demand for a $1,200 a month two-bedroom apartment.
No question.
Right?
And
I also
as,
think-
we were saying before, in order to have the workforce of New York City, we have to have affordable housing. And I think, as long as we have nonprofit executives and organizations and their board of trustees following up there, and lenders and equity players like Capital One. And I'd like to thank Laura,
Our pleasure.
Adam, Alexa, and Brenda, and I'll see you next week.